Thank you for reminding me about that. So I see people already responding to this poll here. And Susan is responding in the chat, joining us from Germany, in India, Spain. The Philippines is pretty late in the Philippines, so thank you for joining us. I look forward to talk about the Sustainable Development Simulator. And thank you for joining us, Marcos from Switzerland, for Nepal, South Sudan, Egypt. So I see there's quite a lot of countries. We're covering a lot of different time zones. So from Portugal and the US. You can scan this QR code on your screen and also join through this link that I just pasted on the chat here in the chat. Yeah. From Libya, thank you, Samia, for joining us. Hope this webinar is insightful for you.
The global crowd.
We're here with Igor. We will introduce ourselves very shortly. So thank you everyone for joining. I'm gonna go ahead and move to our next question. Would love to know a little bit of your background with the Sustainable Development Simulator. And just so you know, you might know the Sustainable Development Simulator as the ISTG model, or even older term, the T21 model. But today we're talking about the Sustainable Development Simulator. It's still the same model. Of course, the model is constantly evolving through time. So we also evolving to go and match the required needs of this time. So I see that most of you actually have explored the simulator briefly. Some people have worked on a project using the simulator before. And for some people, first time learning about it is today. So it's great. I hope that this session is insightful for all of you, even if you have never heard of or you touched the model before. I think this is a good overview of the model capabilities. Thank you everyone for joining. And I see some more responses coming in. So we have a tie between first time learning about it and have explored the simulator briefly. So hopefully maybe in a project or something that we've worked in the country. So thank you so much for joining. I'm gonna go ahead and start my presentation here. So today, I want to introduce you to Igor. It's my colleague. He's a senior policy analyst here at the Millennium Institute. He's also a business development lead. And myself, I'm Fernando. I'm a policy analyst. I've been with the Millennium Institute for a little bit over 3 years. And I'm also leading the communication activities here at the Millennium Institute. So I'm very glad to have you all here. Thank you for joining and from whatever you're joining us from today. And a quick agenda, so you know what's going to happen today. We have a brief introduction about the Millennium Institute and the model with myself. Then we move into the application and going through a little bit more depth about the simulator. And then Igor is presenting the case of application of the model for the green hydrogen project, which is a recent project that we've done, presenting some overview and key results. And we're glad to take some questions towards the end of this session. So thank you again for joining. So the Millennium Institute is a nonprofit organization. We were founded in 1983, so 41 years ago. And we basically specialize in policy impact simulation. And we use data-driven strategies to help decision makers around the world to make these more informed choices. And our goal is to support sustainable transitions across all sectors and help stakeholders design these strategies that align with the sustainable development goals. We have experience from over 40 countries. You can learn more about each country that we worked with in our website. You can go to millenniuminstitute.org/our work and you can find out more about each country and each project. You can see reports, you can see other publications around each of our projects. And if you don't find any specific thing that you're looking for, you can also email us and you try to find more details about any project that we may have in your region. So the Sustainable Development Simulator, it's a system dynamics model that leverages data to simulate the long-term impact of policies. So basically, we help policymakers visualize potential outcomes of decisions through different scenarios. So, and the simulator has a very complex structure. It has 30 sectors with hundreds of indicators, and it also includes over 20 standard policies, meaning policies that have been tested throughout the world that we can test here in the model to see the outcome of these policies here. The model is divided into three different spheres. One is socioeconomic, and the other one is economic, and the last one is environment. And they're all interconnected. So when you change something in one of those sectors, you see impact in another sector. So all the variables are connected. So it's impossible to change one thing without seeing the impact of it in other sectors. And Igor, I'm seeing the chat here. I'm not sure if you can see the chat, but if there's any question you can answer, feel free to answer.
Right.
Thank you. The Sustainable Development Simulator includes 3 different frameworks, sustainability frameworks. The most well-known is the Sustainable Development Goals, and probably the people who answer that have some familiarity with the Sustainable Development Simulator probably know that it applies the Sustainable Development Goals framework. But we have recently also included different frameworks, such as the donut economics and the planetary boundaries. So we're getting more broader with the frameworks that we use to assess sustainability development. I want to give you a quick project steps overview. So when you start working with the Millennium Institute, what does that mean and how long it takes? So usually a project can take up to a year or even more, but it starts by with the stakeholder consultations. We meet with all the stakeholders to identify goals and challenges and ensure that the structure and the indicators that we have in the model reflects the unique needs for that specific region, country. And then we move on to data integration. Igor is going to talk a little bit more about this data integration part, but basically we gather data from well-known sources such as FAO and the World Bank to create these scenarios in the country's context. So it reflects the country's context. Finally, we do some scenario analysis with the tailored model. Of course, it's tailored for your reality, to the reality of one country. And then we can analyze how the different sustainable development goals, for example, interact and review some synergies and trade-offs. And the last part of the project would be some strategic recommendations with a report. So we do this report with the policy scenario analysis and some suggestion where investment should go, for example. And throughout this whole process, throughout these 4 steps, as I said, it could take up to a year or even more. We trained the appointed team to become self-sufficient in using the model. So you see some pictures here of some trainings from our team doing it with appointed teams throughout, for example, Egypt and Angola. So they learn how to use the model. So when the Millennium Institute is not there anymore, they can use the models by themselves. They can update the database and run simulations by themselves. Some success stories, as I said at the beginning, we have experience across 40+ countries. So we have recently done a project with green hydrogen to evaluate the impact of a green hydrogen sector on the economy of Brazil, Namibia, and South Africa. We also had a project on air pollution in Thailand and Laos to analyze the air pollution problem there in that region, and also the livelihood improvement in Australia for Indigenous people, assessing the socio-economic targets across different areas that they have impact on them. And from my part, That's all. I think Igor is diving a little bit further on the model itself and presenting you some results of a key project for us. Igor, do you want to share your screen so you can move the slides by yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Fernando. So let's take a look a little bit in detail to one of these applications, the simulator. The screen should be popping up.
Let me stop sharing.
Okay, that's why. Yeah. Okay, let me get back. Screen again. Yes. Okay, thanks. Right. So let's take a look at one of the applications of the simulator. This was a project involving 3 countries: Brazil, Namibia, and South Africa. I'm gonna emphasize a little bit more the case of Brazil. Yes. So a lot of people ask me, how do you have any inferential power? How can you make statements about policy based on such a complex, interconnected model as the one Fernando showed, right? And the beauty of it is, first of all, we represent established theory, I mean, across these multiple domains. So we don't really create these model structures from scratch, but we represent the knowledge that already exists. And we feed it with standardized data sets aligned with very recognized standards such as MF, IEA from real data sources in each of these countries, either national or international databases. And through a calibration process that helps us minimize the error and bias across these different sectors, we are then able to have a representation or an adaptation of the model for this specific country. This is what allows us to simulate the different synergies and trade-offs that arise from different policy mixes, different policy portfolios that can be tested by the user of the model. So it's really perhaps a different approach compared to what you're used to, but each aspect of it is very rigorous, and we have a model governance structure that helps us do a continuous improvement of this process and of the structure of the model itself. So our template model is publicly documented. The key assumptions are available for you to check in our website. Whenever we go to a country, we engage with local stakeholders to acquire good data, and we report on our levels of error and bias in our calibration report. So all of these things, they contribute to creating the confidence that this type of model can indeed be used to test with different policy portfolios that can help a country tackle their sustainable development goals. Yes, I think I can skip this one. Right. So calibration, and perhaps not all of you are familiar with what it means. So in our case, we have a global template model that needs to be adjusted or adapted to a specific country. And for that, we need to not only feed it with data, but we need to check if the outputs or the synthetic data that this model is generating makes sense in the context of that country. So we match it to historical data, and we have a testing procedure for that, which involves the combined use of exploratory and more fine-tuning algorithms. So it's really in this process of adapting the model to a new country and testing it to see if it really represents that new reality. The model documentation that I mentioned is available on our website. We have sort of a wiki page for it, and that explains the main relationships And if you have any doubts or concerns, we are always happy to engage with people who are doing groundbreaking work and considering new emerging theory or hypotheses that emerge in each of these sectors of our model. So let me go a little bit more in depth into this green hydrogen project that happened in collaboration with GIZ, so German Development Agency, and the Green Hydrogen Business Alliance. So one of the peculiarities of this project is that we had an agency from Germany funding national modeling in 3 other countries. In principle, we didn't have that much contact with the national government stakeholders. Of course, gradually, we managed to involve them. But in principle, it was an initiative, a German initiative, to model the trajectories, the development trajectories of 3 other countries and investigate the role of green hydrogen in these trajectories, right? So the data challenge in this case is when this is the case is, can be enormous, because when you start already with a government representative as your key champion and new country, you obviously have access to facilitated access to data, and it becomes much easier to acquire all the data sets that are needed. In this case, we had to do part of what usually is the work of our local partners. We had to do it ourselves. But let me explain a little bit later about that. So what we wanted to do was to investigate the impact of green hydrogen in the trajectory of sustainable development trajectory of these 3 countries. So we had a scenario that was kind of a base scenario, which was with the announced investments into green hydrogen that are already announced in these 3 countries. Then a scenario with a stronger level of investment, some tax breaks, and some additional policies. And then finally, a third scenario with all of that, but also increasing fossil fuel prices, which is, of course, the products that are being substituted by green hydrogen. So there's a whole substitution dynamics that was involved here. So back to the conversation about data sources. Well, the challenge when you're not starting your national engagement with a national government representative, but you actually have to do groundwork to involve them, is that you don't have immediate access to data, right? And in this case, we were lucky to also find people in the country who helped us, but the challenge of accessing these data sets was enormous. So we started with and here the data sources in bold are really the ones that matter a lot. So in IMF data works as a placeholder, as a starting point for us in the national accounts part of our model. The IEA data, the same for energy, but then you have to look for local data to complement it and use energy data and also treasury data from the Brazilian government, which wasn't easy to access and to interpret, but in the end, with the help of the local partners that we found on the way, we managed to do it, and we managed to calibrate this for Brazil. So that gives you perhaps an idea of the type of work, the extent of the work that we have to do in acquiring and processing this data. So a little bit of the results that we managed to derive from that, right? So we can see, for instance, across the 3 scenarios, the scenarios that I just explained, what is the performance of each of the SDGs, right? And knowing that the performance of an SDG is based on the achievement of targets, which is measured by indicators. So there's a whole structure here in the SDG framework itself that defines how we can compute the SDG performance. So that's very important. And you see that green hydrogen makes the biggest difference in SDGs 7, 13, 12, and 8, right? Run this model, simulate the scenarios. We can see that these are the main differences that arise. And the single most important indicator that changes is indicator 7.2.1, which drives most of the change in the performance of SDG 7, right? Which is the renewable energy share in total final energy. This is measured against the target. So always when you see an SDG indicator performance, 1 means the target is fully achieved, 0 means it's not achieved at all, right? So then when we further analyze it, we see that the substitution dynamics that exists in the country, and considering all the state and the evolution of the energy system in the country, all the substitution dynamics is already happening. We can see that there is enormous potential for green hydrogen to foster solar and wind and to contribute to the decline of coal and gas, right? So we really can see that green hydrogen can play a role there, and it was a fortunate discovery that we could measure it and quantify it over time and discuss the results with stakeholders. We can see then, because of that, we can see also a significant contribution to climate change mitigation, right? In terms of decoupling the country's economy to its emissions, in terms of, also in absolute terms, showing that the country can get closer to achieving its emission targets just because of implementing green hydrogen or fostering green hydrogen. So in this calibration process, to be able to get to these results, departing from the data, we had to run the model. Each of the times that we tried to calibrate it, we ran it 2,000 times. So it was probably run more than 100,000 times, actually. And that's what also allows us to run what we do in some countries, which is exercise of policy optimization, right? Policy optimization is an exercise that tests multiple thousands of policy portfolios to see which ones would maximize SDG progress. In the case of Brazil, we saw that 4 policy areas synergize very well with each other and with the green hydrogen, the evolution of green hydrogen in the country, right? So we saw that adaptation is key. We saw that there is a specific shape of the format, the subsidies that could maximize SDG performance in terms of fertilizer subsidies and also the green hydrogen subsidy itself. We noticed that there are some timing considerations about how and when the subsidies should be deployed. We saw that, surprisingly, unpaved roads play a crucial role still in Brazil in improving access to markets, from farmers to markets and from population to public services. So making sure these roads are well maintained is very important to maximize SDG performance. The last point was about reforestation. We also had a point about hydropower being still an important area for improvement. There is the possibility of revamping the hydro plants. That would be really important in the energy mix. So those were some synergies that we found that surprised some of the stakeholders, and that's when the conversation gets really interesting, is when you manage to expand people's mindsets and show that, well, actually for green hydrogen to play a major role in the sustainable development of Brazil, we also need to invest in adaptation. We also need to subsidize fertilizers in some specific ways. We need to take care of our unpaved roads. We need to invest in reforestation and hydro. So that's sometimes when the conversation is starting to be more interesting is when we unfortunately have to leave the country and leave it for our local counterparts to continue the policy engagement and take it to the political debate, right? But there is always, opportunity for us to, because in this case, for instance, we saw, how much we could, through the synergies, achieve on top of the green hydrogen, on top of the progress that was already brought by green hydrogen itself, which is the black bars there. The gray bars are this, with the synergies, these other policies that I mentioned, right? So we have the opportunity here to increase the overall performance, the overall SDG performance by the end of the simulation period from 30% to more than 40%, right? And that's something that is a big opportunity for international cooperation in Brazil. Regional integration as well. Brazil is the regional leader that can lead this conversation on the SDGs, also South America and Latin America. So those were, some of the analysis we managed to do in that case. We hope to hear from you, your reactions, your questions. Please use the QR code. And I guess Fernando will take it from here. Thanks.
Thank you, Igor. I see that some people are using the Q&A here in the chat, or the Q&A feature here in Zoom. So we can also keep it here instead of showing this QR code, so you can maybe stop sharing. And I see some question here in the Q&A. So this is the first time I'm using this Zoom setting. I'll click answer live and see what happens. So Mohsen is asking, can academic institution benefit and have access to the Sustainable Development Simulator? So it depends on the project. It depends what is the goal. If you specific research that you want to do, the Millennium Institute had in the past welcomed different students to develop the model itself, such as master students and PhD students. But the project itself, providing the model in full for one university, the Millennium Institute does not do that because there's some intellectual properties that belong to the Millennium Institute that we cannot share completely with an university, for example. I hope that answers the question. And
yeah, we've had in the past and continue to have cooperations with universities. Just that it involves a big commitment also from the university, right? So we're happy to talk, we're happy to discuss, but it's something that you just install on your computer and see the results. It involves quite some work across perhaps a year of work.
Yeah, there is, maybe do you want to answer the next question, Igor?
What are the limitations? Oh, that's the easy question, right? Now, so the boundaries of our model are very transparent. So everything that is outside of the boundary can be considered a limitation, right? We have a public documentation about that. I can tell you a little bit of some of the areas of improvement we have been working with. One of them is a lot of our local partners wanted to simulate industrial policy, right? Because mission-oriented innovation policy and all of these things, they're very much involved now. So we now have recently implemented in the model the possibility of making distinctions between different subsectors through economic activity classifications in our model, which were previously much more general, let's say. So it helps you to simulate very specific industrial policy in the model. That's a very recent improvement. Something we are looking for funding to improve is relationships with the global scale. particularly related to climate and biodiversity, right? So that's one limitation nowadays of the model, is that if you're only running it for one single country, you cannot see the, many feedback processes with the global scale. So that's something we're working. It's a big caveat nowadays in our model. Yeah.
Yeah. One important thing about the limitations of the simulator is that you see the fuel for the model, the simulator, is data. So you must have data. You must have good quality data to run the model. So if you don't have data, there's going to be a lot of assumptions, and the more assumptions, and you have a more limited simulation. So the data you have, the more available data you have, the best will be the simulations. Let's move on to the next one from Fernanda. So how can researchers from universities have access to the non-demo model version of the simulator? Last time I was informed that the package for Brazil would be $10,000, and the MOU is, do you know what that means?
Memorandum of Understanding.
Okay, would be required. Is this still the way how researchers can access the simulator? Do you have maybe a more concrete answer, Igor, for that?
Yeah, I mean, the cost, even when we have very dedicated university partner, and there is the need to implement the model from scratch in a new country, which wouldn't be the case for Brazil, but just to give a more general idea, there's still a cost on the table of about 50K USD that someone has to pay. It can be another entity, not us, not the university, but someone else. Or, in some very specific cases, if there is a real commitment of an in-kind contribution by the university that is very strong, we have guarantees that they will really execute the project, and this is a strategic country for us, we can find ways to subsidize those 50K. But it's really in special cases when you have a strong commitment of a high number of hours researcher time that you dedicate to. So it depends a bit on the case.
Thank you, Igor. So maybe I can take this question from Roxanne. Does the simulator prioritizes the weight of the sustainable development goals achieved? So this graph that Igor presented, it's an average of all the indicators in that is specific also. We have 17 goals, and each of the 17 goals have their own indicators. And one thing to notice is that the Sustainable Development Goals have 179 targets and 218 indicators, if I'm not mistaken. Not all of these indicators are in the simulator. This is probably one of the limitations, but we do have kind of 65, 70 indicators in the model. So the graph and the answer for the performance of one Sustainable Development Goal achievement is based on the average of these indicators, the performance of these indicators in 2030.
Yeah.
You want to add to that, Igor?
Yeah, nowadays more and more countries want to put 2050 as the horizon for simulation, so we've been doing more and more of that. And yes, I mean, we don't have all the indicators, but I would say we have almost all of the ones that are computable, right? Because some indicators are more qualitative nature, or they cannot be measured over time. They're more binary, yes or no questions, things like that. So those, I mean, it wouldn't make sense to have a dynamic model to interrogate them, but all of the ones that do make sense, we have them there.
Great. So I see a question from Abhishek here. Can the model be used for quantifying the co-benefits, or do you have a plan to add this to the model? For example, quantified benefits to health and air quality from switching to renewable and electric vehicles.
Yes.
And there's the second question: what are the costs associated with using the model for one project for a private company? Let's start with the first one. I think Igor present a little bit of the synergies and how the model can do that, can quantify the synergy between one or two or more indicators. Then maybe do you want to complement that?
And particularly, this example is one that we do compute in the model. So, so yes, we have a lot of what you call co-benefits. We mostly call them synergies, but I see what you mean by co-benefits. Yes, and I can tell you about the costs. For a private company, I mean, it's rare that we work with private companies. So we'd have to understand a little bit more because the model is not able to assess necessarily your contribution to. So if that's your interest, we would have to detail a little bit more. It's a national model, and it's made for policymakers. So for a private company, we would have to understand a little bit more of the scope. I don't have a price tag in mind.
Yeah. And what we can do about just adding a little bit more on the quantified benefits to health and air quality, or the model is able to quantify the return of investment and let us know which of the investments will give you more return on the framework that you're using, such as the Sustainable Development Goals. If you invest in this specific policies or this specific set of policies, which of those will give you the best return, the best performance of the Sustainable Development Goals achievement, basically. So yes, to answer your question, the model is able to quantify these co-benefits between different variables, different indicators. And Igor, there is a question here, and what is the accuracy of the model?
What is the accuracy of the model? So in big models like this, in integrated models, it really depends. In each country, we will have levels of error and bias that are distributed differently across the different sectors of the model. So let's say for one country, we might have more difficulty in being accurate or reproduce the historical behavior in energy. Other country might be more about water and health, whatever, right? So we are very transparent about that, and we disclose these levels of error and bias in every project that we do. Apart from that, then it's not about accuracy anymore. It's more about precision, meaning that how well we describe the world. Then we have our whole documentation and model governance to tackle that. So it's important to be aware that accuracy in this case, I'm referring more to numerical or quantitative accuracy, and precision more about qualitative or structure precision.
Thank you, Igor. I see some of you have sent some questions in the chat, so I'll answer this last one here in the Q&A feature, and we'll go through the questions in the chat as well. So just give me a couple more minutes, and we'll hopefully tackle all the questions here, right? So Tai Yingli is asking, have you been able to compare what the model predicted with what actually happened afterwards, potentially after the project has completed for a few years? So just to start, we don't really say predicted, because the model is, how can I say, it's not a magical box where you can see the future. So we don't predict the future. We can say it forecast. We can see the trends of, based on the data that we have available, what is the trend that the indicators have and the policies that are tested. And have we actually happened to see any that the reality translate into what the model projected? And we do have some projects that, for example, have long paths. For example, in Uruguay, I have worked with one of our project managers, Carla, and she said that the model that she worked back then, it's been a few years already, she said that most of the indicators match with many of the model projected back then. Do you have any specific example, Igor, about this?
Yeah, that's something we would like to do more, but it's very hard to find the money for that, because you need a structured evaluation approach to measure the contribution of our model and how much it has really helped local governments to national governments to improve the performance and things like that. It's something that we always try to fund, but it's very rare that some wants to give us money for that. So unfortunately, all of this follow-up that should happen after the projects is hard to fund. If you guys have any money for that, we're open.
And so, Insert Live. Let me go through the chat here and see if there are any other questions that we haven't answered yet. And I think a question from Ben saying, how do you reconcile SDG 8 with degrowth?
With, sorry?
Degrowth.
Degrowth?
Yeah, degrowth.
Okay. Yeah, we don't yet have any like specific application of the model to test the growth policies. We see that the conversation is starting to be more mainstream. We hear more and more policymakers talking about it, often in pejorative terms. What we do have is a collaboration with Earth for All, in which we test some policies that are sometimes associated with the degrowth conversation. And you can check more about that in the Earth for All website, where we have some reports written there.
And so Rashida has a question. Did the model create a scenario of green hydrogen increase, but continuation of old growth trees being chopped and mining and land use change? Just reforestation may not be enough, perhaps.
We have all of that, all of these dynamics in the model. So land use is, central thing in our model, and we have we can even simulate tree planting and other types of ecosystem regeneration policies, land protection. There's an array of policies related to land use that we can simulate, that we represent the phenomena in the model. That's originally Millennium Institute worked a lot in land use issues, sustainable agriculture, and so on. So this is a part of our model that is really, really high detail, and we're happy to engage the conversation.
Yeah, I see a very good question from Ben here about roads and how this influences other things, such as having more cars and traffic and pollution, which has been more and more in discussion lately. And the question goes, whenever I see roads, I see the creation or exacerbation of car-based transportation networks, which then foster inequality, traffic violence, pollution, exclusion of non-driver, which is probably most people. The richest nations are currently struggling to reverse the damage done by car-centric networks. And his question goes to, can your model inform management of the inequalities that have been created by roads in many countries?
In general, not. If you look at the template model, that's not one of the relationships that we model. But we do have some country models in more urbanized countries in which this issue was brought and it was incorporated. So basically, we have dynamics of more cars driving the expansion of the road network, and the road network driving the expansion of cars, and the competition with other substitution dynamics there with other types of transport, and all the consequences then spread through the model. But it's not yet in the template, something that we are looking at. But, your description is very good. Thanks for describing.
Yeah, that's a great description, man. I can say that the model does have some feedback loops in the area of cars and roads and emissions. For example, the more cars, the model has this feedback loop on emissions, and it, as you said, it can probably, the model can include more and more of these dynamics that you just mentioned here. And let me go here, scroll down into it. So Maria is asking, is it possible to simulate the impact of policies on a global scale? Does the model take into account the targets of the SDGs or the overall SDG score?
Yeah, so the relationship with the global scale is something that we are working with, because now we have national models for many countries. So we also want to be able to do some generalizations to the global scale, and then the feedback to the national level. We're not quite there yet. We're actually actively looking for funding for that. And what was the other question?
Does the model take into account the targets of the SDGs
Yes.
or the overall SDG score?
No, it's targets. So it's operation at the indicator level, meaning we compute in performance against targets. And so the overall score of one SDG is mean of the overall score of all targets. So that's how we compute it, and that's how it should be computed, right? Unfortunately, in many instances, we see people claiming SDG performance for, let's say, SDG 2, but they're just using one indicator to compute it, and that's not correct. That's not even viable according to the framework. So it's a good question, and of course we follow the framework as literally as possible.
And Fernanda, I see your question about the work on the green hydrogen. It has already been published, and I can send you a link so you can download the report. And I think that was basically the last question. And I can grab the link here for the green hydrogen project. It's in my notes somewhere, or maybe I can send you later. Yeah, I'll have to send you later. Do you guys have any other question? Maybe you can use the Q&A feature here to send any other question. And also, this is being recorded. So if you want to revise and revisit any of the topics that we covered here, we'll be free to do so. Do you have a link to the green hydrogen project?
I can easily have it. Yeah.
So if you can place on the chat. Thank you, Igor. So it seems that we are coming to an end of this very first webinar at the Millennium Institute. We are planning a few more to come, so you can keep an eye on your inbox to learn more about the future webinars that we will host, covering different topics. We also send in a feedback form after this webinar. You can suggest any topics that you would like for us to cover, or suggest any feedback for us to improve the next sessions. And you can contact me or Igor.
Gonna leave my email
for you.
Too.
Thank you, Igor.
Thank you, Fernando. Thank you, everyone, for attending. See you next time.
Yeah, thank you all. This session was insightful and gave you some idea of how the model works and how you can simulate sustainable development and use this tool to help decision making. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.